Welcome back to another video on modernity. I'm Kian.
I'm Mabel.
I'm Sandy.
And I'm Briza. Today's video will be about Module 4, Modernity Intensifying.
In the previous video, we tried to unravel modernity as it continues to expand and diversify across the globe.
We learned that globalization, which is brought about by modernity, has brought us great wealth, but also further intensified poverty and inequality in the global south.
That's right, Mabel. Adding on to what you just said, although the North is known to be the powerful ones who take advantage of the underdeveloped South by colonizing and exploiting them, it has become apparent that the North is not exempted from the same struggles faced by the South.
In this video, we will further discuss how modernity has intensified due to the influence of globalization and how this affects and translates to our modern institutions, political structures, and transnational politics.
Today, we will first be discussing Prosperity and Inequality in Metro Manila by Emma Porio. This was a really interesting read for me because it opened my eyes to so many things I was unaware of.
I found it very insightful too. This reading tells us why there is poverty amidst the existence of great wealth. So, Mabel, why exactly is this happening in our country?
On the surface level, we know that the Philippine economy has been booming over the past few years. In 2011, the 40 richest families on the Forbes Wealth list accounted for 76% of the country's GDP growth. Meanwhile, in 2015, the net worth of the top 20 Filipino families is about $15.6 billion, while 70% of the people subsist on less than $2 per day. Imagine having only $2 to spend at the present time. That's only around 97 pesos and is equivalent to a two-piece burger steak meal in Jollibee. But what about for breakfast or for dinner? What if we have to feed a family of four? This is the reality the urban poor continues to face till this day. These data show us how the rich and wealthy are the main proponents of the economic growth of the country. Consequently, this urban growth and development is further widening the gap between the rich and the poor.
Attempts in mitigating the persistence of poverty was undergone during the post-EDSA period in the 1990s. The onset of the 1986 People Power Revolution caused revolutionary changes in the government. Democratization and decentralization of governance paved the way for those in the lower strata of society to gain access to housing and other basic necessities. However, due to lack of financial and technical resources to help them, they had to obtain revenue from projects by the private sector. This gave rise to multiple commercial and residential buildings, but such projects led to an increase in land prices and ended up displacing the urban poor. Several families would have to find another place to stay, which are usually places that are not suitable for habitation. In short, these legislations that were meant to benefit the poor merely intensified the competition for housing resources, both by the industrial sector and the marginalized group.
An example Porio used is the gentrification of the Pensol social housing site in Quezon City. The Community Mortgage Program in 1992 allowed the urban poor members of the Pensol Residents and Housing Association to acquire land for their housing necessities. Gentrification, which pertains to the increase in land value due to the emergence of commercial developments and infrastructure projects in the area, was initiated when some of the original beneficiaries of the said program sold their lands to buyers coming from the higher social strata, as they could no longer afford the monthly payments. The gentrification further intensified when commercial developments were established in the nearby area of the housing site. The UP Town Center, which is very familiar to us, was established during this time. Additionally, the new owners renovated and improved their properties for leasing and commercial purposes. And considering that the housing site is already situated in a prime location, all of these factors increase the demand and value of these properties. As we can see, gentrification in the Pansol social housing site made such land properties unaffordable for the intended beneficiaries of the program. This ultimately led them to being displaced.
Unfortunately, the housing and community development gains among the urban poor was eroded not merely by large capitalist development initiatives. During the mid-2000s, the local government unit of Marikina City was recognized for its success in relocating all of its informal settlers within the city proper. This was highly commendable as other LGUs were notorious for relocating their informal settlers outside the metropolis. Although Marikina City was successful in its in-city relocation, floods have repeatedly devastated these housing communities. Apart from this, Metro Manila is home to about 500,000 informal settler families. Informal settlers who are displaced are usually relocated to flood-prone areas or are living in substandard housing, as these are the only available spaces left. Whenever a typhoon strikes the country, these people constantly have to rebuild what was destroyed despite not having enough resources to recover. Both instances depict how natural disasters and climate change have further displaced these communities and pushed them further into poverty.
It is truly devastating to see how the income inequality that persists in our society places the marginalized group at greater risk for the adverse impacts of climate change and natural disasters. This is an issue that we cannot remain indifferent about anymore. More so, it is also saddening how some of these capitalist development initiatives are robbing the chances of the marginalized group of having more favorable living conditions. I believe that a combined effort in determining and deriving a more purposeful allocation in government funds is needed in order to reach a more prosperous future that annihilates the grave issue of poverty.
In addition to what Mabel said, the reading made me realize that we also play a role in the challenges the urban poor faces. As students who are knowledgeable about the current environmental issues, we must be more cautious of our actions, especially those that are harmful to the environment, like emitting harmful gas whenever we use our cars or disposing our waste improperly, to name a few. Such actions result in climate change, which then turns into strong typhoons that repeatedly destroys what the poor have been trying to build for themselves. Coming from the privileged sector, we do not experience as much damage since we live in decent homes and have savings for emergencies. Maybe if we all made an effort to lessen our environmental impact, not only will we be able to experience fewer disasters, but it would also help ease the suffering of the urban poor.
I agree with you, Kian. Sometimes we do fail to perceive the consequences of our actions. In addition, although revolutionary movements have pressured governments and ruling elites to arrive at meaningful solutions in mitigating the effects of poverty and inequality, these have not been imminent. Therefore, immediate response and meaningful action are obliged from these governance systems in order to reclaim the trust of its citizens.
That's right, Mabel. Not only will that enhance the citizens' trust in the government, but it will also be of great help to those from the vulnerable and marginalized sector of our society. This will be able to provide them with better standards of living, which could lead them to a more stable future. I believe that in this era where poverty and social inequality is rampant and prevailing, determined and combined efforts is an utmost necessity. As the nation's citizens, we also play a vital role in this persisting problem as we are entrusted with the responsibility of electing good and trustworthy government officials who would be able to effectively address these issues and fervently show compassion to the marginalized sector of our society.
Thank you so much, Kian and Mabel, for that very insightful sharing. Now, Sandy and I would like to get deeper into the topic and discuss The Demise of the Nation State by Rana Dasgupta. In this essay, Dasgupta contends that the modern international order, which consists of autonomous nation states, is in peril. The evidently accelerating decomposition of the political system in the Philippines is an instance, but we aren't the only ones experiencing this because it's happening all over the world. Dasgupta stated that the most historic development of our era is actually the waning of the nation state. It's the increasing inability of governments to withstand countervailing 21st century forces and its loss of political leverage over human circumstances. We are overwhelmingly suffering from a deregulated finance, autonomous technology, religious militancy, and great power rivalry. This demise has precipitated so-called solutions proposed by the systems to cover up their incompetence. Various national governments continue to ignite wars to cause a distraction, practice ethno-religious purification, magnify presidential powers, and abandon civil rights and the rule of law.
That's right, economical and technological advancements are eroding national governments' power to regulate their market and information flows. In consequence, today's political system has a generally unopposed distribution of global wealth and capital, which concomitantly creates major socio-economic inequalities. In the West, political authority is being undermined by the continuing techno-financial advancements. The wealthiest are the only ones continuing to rise, while the bottom are being hampered from acquiring the same equal opportunities. Their governments are no longer able to fulfill their old promise of developing mankind and creating a welfare state. Massive private-owned enterprises are becoming the dominating gatekeepers of nation-states with their pledge of a different algorithmic form of governance and citizenship. Political power is depleted and politicians are no longer able to bring about substantive change. Instead, they are attempting to stimulate strong emotions from citizens by using foreigners and refugees as scapegoats, for instance, as a way to conceal the sheer ineptitude of the government. Just as how Trump is attempting to imbue U.S. citizenship with new power, ultimately convincing citizens to believe that they have something that makes them superior.
Meanwhile, governments of poorer and formerly colonized nations who came to harbor intense disgust for empires and the Cold War are leaning towards radical nationalism, authoritarianism, ethnic cleansing, and strongman leaders. The agitated communities of decolonized countries fought in violent struggles to manage the new political system and the power that came with it. Strongman leaders retain control by inciting social rivalries and transforming ethnic or religious divisions into instruments for political terror, just as how Ferdinand Marcos did when he took over our nation in 1965. Dasgupta referred to these types of nations as quasi-states or states that are reinforced by external powers and have only limited control over national affairs. This destruction of political systems has also given rise to some groups assembling transnational movements as alternatives for nation states. Altogether, the end of the Cold War has revealed the vulnerability of the poorest countries in the world to violence and instability, and that the transition from empire to sovereign state has been a failure rather than an improvement.
Gupta also argued that the current international order based on sovereign nation states conflicts with what Woodrow Wilson originally intended. Today, the principle of national independence has become firmly established among nations, yet this barely achieves the blueprint that Wilson, along with other visionary leaders, proposed. Wilson sought something far greater, a comprehensive intrastate democracy that would guarantee global cooperation, stability, and justice. He aspired to create a society of nations governed by a system of laws under its own universal institutions. However, the Cold War crushed any possibilities of this society, and instead led to the emergence of an illegitimate international order surrounded by lawlessness. Undeniably, for many countries, this long established lawlessness has been proven to be a system that does not provide a viable future. Before long, we will have to take measures to mend this ineffective system that continues to create chaos among nations.
I agree with you, Sandy. If we do not take action now, this crisis we are faced with will only worsen. I know questions like, is there anything we can do? Or is there even a solution to this problem? Are on top of your mind right now. Indeed, there is a solution to this global problem. But first, we must believe that there is a to our current condition. Things may seem impossible at first, but as Dasgupta would say, we are now in a position to begin.
That's right, Riza. Crazy possibilities will only be realized if we dare to explore. Dasgupta proposed three solutions to the problem. First, the political system must be supplemented with global financial regulation, wherein money flow must be regulated in a way that considers all nation states and their securities, and a portion of this money flow should be transferred to public channels. If necessary, systematic transfer of resources from rich to the poor should also occur for everyone's welfare.
The political system must also be supplemented with global flexible democracy, wherein monopoly in politics should be abandoned. Instead, nations should start forming stable clusters of nations that could support each other, like that of the European Union, so that national upheaval would not result in total collapse. This way, minor national governments themselves would also be laid open to a higher level of supervision, considering that they pose the largest threat to international order.
Lastly, new conceptions of citizenship must be formed. Today, inherent in our citizenship is our accidental privileges, which simultaneously determines the unintended disadvantages or inequalities of others. Hence, there comes the need for us to direct efforts on developing frameworks that reimagine citizenship in a way that disentangles it from the limitations of territory, and at the same time, spread benefits to people more equally. And that marks the last point of Dasgupta's essay. Biza, do you have any comments for the reading?
The points raised by Rana Dasgupta are truly an eye-opener for me because we grew up in this kind of environment and system. So sometimes we become blind or accustomed to it and we think to ourselves that there's no more hope for change. But that is exactly the opposite of what we should do because nothing will ever happen if we simply accept this. The consequences brought about by the decline of the nation state are very much evident and felt across all the world, regardless of one's status, and we must put a stop to this. We have to free ourselves from this system and end the further decay of our nations. How about you, Sandy?
For me, I am quite amazed with Dasgupta's proposed solutions because of how imaginative and strategic these are. The reading also made me realize that globalization and modernity does not always mean positive developments. Sometimes these can also bring about various limitations that we fail to realize, such as that of the impact it has on politics. However, we may also use our creativity and knowledge to release ourselves from this alarming condition of the nation state. We must reimagine the possibilities of globalization and believe that political forms are capable of operating with the same competence as techno-financial revolutions.
To wrap up this module, we know that globalization isn't always positive, as it is evident that modernity has brought unintended consequences. Despite this, we must not lose hope for a better future for everyone. Since it is us humans who cause such problems, therefore it is also us who can find solutions to it.
The problem of globalization does not lie in its own concept itself. It was meant to be globally benefiting upon its implementation and existence in the first place. However, as we have seen in this module, much of the issues that emanate from globalization comes from how it is managed and regulated by different sectors of society.
The so-called solutions being executed by the political system should be put to a stop. Instead, we should redirect our focus to finding solutions that will be beneficial for all sectors of society, or at least to those who are in need the most.
To be able to consummate globalization, we have to reimagine the international order. Being that these issues are embedded in transnational powers, these call for global political measures. Hence, nations will have to learn how to collaborate and assist each other in politics.
Thank you for watching. Don't forget to catch the next video on Module 5 Parallel Modernities. See you there!